You're listening to Speaking Sidemount, the podcast where we talk all things sidemount diving, from equipment, skills, techniques, and sidemount diving expeditions to interviews with some of the world's top sidemount divers. Whether you're new to sidemount, been sidemount diving for years, or just want to know more, this is the place for all things sidemount. I'm your host, Steve Davis. Let's get wet. Welcome back to Speaking Sidemount. I'm Steve Davis. This episode is kindly sponsored by X-Deep, and their support of me and this podcast makes everything you're about to listen to possible. As an X-Deep diver for nearly 6 years now, one of the things I've grown to appreciate is the genuine innovation that Pieter and the team bring to their product development. And so it was no surprise to me that they took something simple but really important to us as divers, the trusty bolt snap and double ender, and made some simple but highly effective changes to produce a better product. I had the chance to dive the new X-Deep clips last week and was very impressed with the ease with which you can operate them even with thick gloves on. The larger space for both the thumb and forefinger placement, plus the right angle, gives you a positive grip and makes them very easy to use. I know that demand is very high on these little beauties, but if you can get your hands on some, then I would highly recommend them for your cylinder bolt snaps, double enders, and long hose regulator clip. And so, on with this week's episode. As a former naval officer, I have a fascination with shipwrecks and absolutely love diving and exploring them. There is something special about seeing a ship underwater, understanding its structure, how the ship worked when in service, how the crew worked and lived on it, how it was sunk, and then seeing it evolve as an underwater habitat for marine life really does place wreck diving at the very pinnacle of diving for me. Add to that the ability to penetrate deep into a wreck in sidemount and go places that are difficult, if not impossible, in other dive configurations, and you see, I'm sure, why I love it so much. Now, back in 2015-16, I was writing my first book, aptly, on a purpose-sunk dive wreck here in New Zealand, HMNZS Canterbury. I had the honour to serve on this amazing ship, firstly as a young apprentice engineer in the early 80s, and then later as an engineer officer, and ultimately as the Marine Engineer Officer or Chief Engineer. She was a great ship when in service of the Royal New Zealand Navy and is continuing to serve today as a fabulous dive wreck and marine habitat. If you get the chance to come to New Zealand, she is definitely one of the must-do dives. Sitting at between 14 and 37 meters in depth, she offers everything for divers ranging from advanced open water level to advanced wreck. There is information on my book in the podcast notes and also many videos of my dives on Canterbury from the Sidemount Pros YouTube channel. Check them out if you want more. Now, I was writing the book while working at Gozo Technical Diving in Malta, and my good friend there, John Diath, was telling me about his wreck diving experiences in Sri Lanka and introduced me to another book, Ghosts of the Deep by Dharshana, Jayawardena. He loaned me a copy and I was enthralled by the level of detail in each wreck it covered and also the in-depth content on the history of the wrecks. So when I saw on Facebook that Dharshana had recently identified the wreck of the Perseus by locating the ship's bell after 5 years of painstaking exploration and research, I had to get him on the show for us all to hear more. Dharshana Jayawardena, or DJ, is a pioneering underwater explorer in Sri Lanka. In addition to being an author, he's the founder of divesrilanka.com, a comprehensive source of information about scuba diving in Sri Lanka, and is also a field editor for Asian Diver magazine. DJ has identified the origins of several mystery wrecks, among them the World War I SS Worcestershire and World War II Catalina patrol bomber. Recently, he ventured into cave diving and discovered Sri Lanka's first major underwater cave system amongst its scenic mountains. Now, in this episode, DJ and I talk about his background in diving and sidemount, his exploration of Sri Lanka's many shipwrecks, his recent cave exploration project in the Sri Lankan mountains, and his upcoming presentation on shipwreck exploration at ADEX conference in Singapore. All this and much, much more in this episode of Speaking Sidemount. Dharshana, welcome to Speaking Sidemount.
Thank you.
It's awesome to meet you at last. As I was saying off mic, I've known you for about 3 years. A good friend of mine, John Diath in Gozo, I was having dinner at his house, and it was when I was writing a book on the Canterbury here in New Zealand, and he said, you've got to have a look at this book. And he gave me Ghosts of the Deep. I took it home. I contemplated not giving it back to him. It was that good, but I really enjoyed looking through that and seeing some of the shipwrecks that you've explored and discovered in Sri Lanka. Amazing achievement. But I'm really interested in starting just to hear a little bit about your background, how you got into diving. and then specifically a little about side mount diving.
Yeah, so I think I got into diving about 16 years ago, and it was purely unintentional. I was actually working in the US, flew into Bermuda, and I had some friends there who said, and I couldn't even swim at that point, 16 years ago, said there's diving, snorkeling. So I said, okay, I want to try diving, but I said, I can't swim. And they said, well, the instructor said, if you don't panic, you can just try going in and having a look. So I just did the try dive, and I couldn't do it because I was feeling so claustrophobic and afraid. So I said, come up, and I came up, and I was a bit ashamed of myself. And I just wanted to do the open water course and just say that, okay, I've done it and I've overcome my fear. So I did that when I came back to Sri Lanka, and then couldn't stop after that. So that's how it happened.
So that's quite amazing. So you couldn't swim. Did you learn to swim before you actually did the course, or did you learn to swim kind of during or after the course?
During the course. I swam every day to a point where I became quite good at it. So now I'm a good swimmer. I can last in the ocean if I fall off a boat. Stay up for days if you want.
Yeah, kind of necessary. But that's quite amazing. So it was really about overcoming a fear that drove you into diving. And once you became an open water student, what took you from there to where you are now, where you're an explorer both of wrecks and also of caves?
So I think everything is quite unplanned. It's just incremental developments in my diving capabilities. So once I did the open water, I wanted to do the advanced. And by this time, I was kind of hooked. And I was doing a lot of dives a year. And it was a natural progression. So I did the rescue after that. And then I made a decision. I will not be a DM or instructor. I will instead pursue technical courses because I'm working in a software company as an operational manager, and I didn't want to start a career in diving professionally yet. Right. So I decided I'm just going to be technically proficient.
So you decided to invest some more time in learning about technical diving. Talk us through your progression through the technical levels.
So after I did my rescue dive, I did most of my diving courses in Thailand, off Phuket and in Chonburi. And I did my PSI solo diver course, and then I decided to do the technical courses on open circuit. And actually, I had been diving in Sri Lanka, exploring ships. So at the same time in Sri Lanka, I found that there were lots of potential for shipwreck diving. And basically what I do is I talk to fishermen and ask them to tell me where the ships are. And then you got to kind of strike a relationship with them and get them to trust you because they don't really like to give away their fishing grounds.
Understand.
So what happened as a result is that I came across many shipwrecks that were in actually deeper waters than I could dive as a rescue diver or a recreational diver.
Sure.
So I actually started pushing myself. I started going beyond 50 meters without any technical training. Then I realized it's not the right thing to do. So I thought I need to do this right. And then I started doing my tech courses and trimix and everything from that point onward. So then after that, it was more of a natural. So my drive was to actually explore shipwrecks. So that's why I did the technical courses, and I done up to open circuit trimix. Then again, another, I would say shipwrecks kind of was driving my need to get into obviously Sidemount and also to cave diving because I had to go inside shipwrecks, and I had a really bad experience once as a complete, I would say, a fool trying to do something that I wasn't trained for and equipped for. So I realized I need to do everything correct. And because I wanted to penetrate shipwrecks and go in, I did the cave course, the full cave course. So that's how I developed also a passion for cave diving after that. So I never intended to be a cave diver. I just wanted to do it to get into shipwrecks, but then ended up, liking caves and starting exploring caves. So it's all accidental and unintentional journey, really.
Yeah, just following wherever the water takes you, right?
Exactly, yeah.
So I find that really interesting because I remember way back, I was diving quite a lot of shipwrecks. And when I did my cave course, the statement was made to me by my cave instructor that cave divers can dive shipwrecks, but shipwreck divers can't necessarily dive caves. And so cave training was seen as really good training for shipwrecks. But what I've kind of learned since then is that there are some real idiosyncrasies about wrecks that make them quite different to caves. And I've been exploring this with some of my guests. So with Mike Thomas from the CDG in the UK, spoke about this at length, about the difference between shipwrecks, mine diving, and cave diving. So how did you rationalize that? You'd done cave training, but you had some shipwreck experience. Let's talk through some of the differences for a moment between the two things and how you felt your training as a cave diver prepared you for shipwreck diving.
Yeah, so I think maybe about 7 years ago, I think I was not a tech diver, and I went into a shipwreck with my open circuit recreational gear, and then I got trapped inside a shipwreck. I think I had a really horrible experience, and after doing everything stupid, the only thing I did right when panic started coming, I closed my eyes and started breathing.
Good.
And calm myself down. So I think I've had some really tough experiences, but I think talking about similarities at this point, I can't really think of, maybe as you say, idiosyncrasies, because I haven't really done, after I did my cave course, I've been mostly in caves and not so much inside shipwrecks. I've done some shipwreck penetrations, but that has not been enough for me to tell you that I see major differences. More or less, I've seen the same challenges. You can get disoriented, silt can start developing, stuff can fall on you, things like that. But and then also the lines can get cut in sharper shipwreck environments, and then there can be hazardous marine life. But I haven't really experienced much differences for me to tell you that there are significant differences in ships and caves.
Yeah, and maybe that's a nice way to look at it too, is to look at what is the same about it. So as you say, you're in an overhead environment, you have the challenges of navigation, so you can potentially get lost. And then the other thing, of course, is you can potentially lose visibility through silt outs. And of course, you can have the same equipment failures that we all practice in our cave courses, whether that be out of air and side mounts a bit funny, but we practice out of gas for sure. And we also practice loss of light, loss of line, all those sort of things. And so I guess there are many, many similarities. And then you started to mention some of the things that are different. And I think the thing that stands out to me about what's different is, number one, yes, there's a lot of sharp edges and much more likely that things will fall on you in a shipwreck than in a flooded cave. If you're in a dry cave, then that's a bit different. And then there's also the potential for hatches to close on you, those sort of things. But one thing that really always stands out to me, having spent 14 years living and working on ships, is that they're made by man and they're made for people to traverse through them. So there's going to be passageways that are very regular. The passageways typically run in a straight line. There's going to be hatches that go between decks, and there'll be ladders there normally. It's arranged in decks and it's arranged in sections. So one of the things that John Chatterton taught me when I did my wreck course with him, and I found it really interesting, was that you can use the lines of the wreck as navigation. And of course, we try and do that in caves. We always back reference and we're looking at particular rocks and particular formations and the way that the cave works. And the more we know about a cave, the better. I think it's easier in shipwrecks, to be honest, because the lines of the wreck are much more regular, unless, of course, it's broken up. The more broken up the wreck, the more that goes away. But that's just something that stands out to me about what's certainly different and can work in your favor over a cave where, maybe that doesn't work quite as well for you. You're renowned as an explorer of wrecks, and particularly through your book, Ghosts of the Deep, which I want to go into in a moment. So tell us a little bit about the wrecks of Sri Lanka and what you've discovered there.
Right. So I think Sri Lanka is in a very unique geographical position, being where it is in the Indian Ocean. And for thousands of years, ships have been coming from every country in the world, I think, around
from Europe to Asia for sure, right?
Asia, yeah. And so to talk about the history, we've got a ship that's 2,200 years old.
Wow.
It's the oldest wreck in South Asia. And right now it's being studied by the Department of Archaeology. It's actually not very deep. It's at 30 meters. And it was found by fishermen who were catching sea cucumbers, and they just bumped into something unusual and found this wreck. And I've dived. It's not a wreck. It's just a mound of stuff, but it's a historical site. So from 2,200 years to recent times, ships are sinking all the time because, for example, in Sri Lanka, there are a couple of ports, and one of the major ports is Colombo, the capital cities.
Yes.
And Colombo is, in fact, one of the best places to dive shipwrecks. We have old Dutch ships, which are called gunships, which are made of wood. So only thing you would find is wood guns and anchors. So they're not really exciting from a diving standpoint to observe marine life, but they are exciting from a historical wreck diver enthusiast standpoint. And we have impacts from World War One and World War Two.
Mm-hmm.
I identified two wrecks that were sunk by the German raider SMS Wolf off Colombo.
Mm-hmm.
And then there is the world's first purpose-built aircraft carrier, which was sunk by the Japanese in 1942, the HMS Hermes, and the Korea fleet. There are about 5 more ships around that were sunk at the same time. I think if you compare countries in South Asia, we do have lots of shipwrecks compared to maybe even countries like Malaysia, Maldives.
Sure. No, that sounds amazing. And tell us, what are your favorite wrecks in this region?
That's a really tough one. I like almost any wreck I dive with. So I think 2 of my favorite wrecks are the SS Worcestershire and the SS Perseus, which was sunk in 1917, February, by sea mines laid by the German commerce trader Wolf. Have you heard about the Wolf, by the way?
Yes, yeah, I have, only through your book.
Oh, right. It's an amazing story, the story of Wolf, how the German commerce trader was sailing for 15 months without calling to port, and it sank almost 30 ships all around the world, including somewhere around Australia and New Zealand, and sank some ships there.
Sure.
So in 2009, I was looking at the Admiralty maps, and I just saw this mark on the Admiralty maps, and I was interested to know what that was, because it's a mark of shipwreck that was submerged. And I looked for 2 years, talking to fishermen, diving in up to 60 meters and just finding nothing. And then just one day a fisherman said, okay, I know a shipwreck. It's deep and it's in the area you are looking for. And he took me there. And then I found this massive ship underwater.
Yeah.
Huge. So it was a mystery what this ship was, right? So then when I was doing a lot of research on what this ship was, I found that it could be the SS Worcestershire because it was sunk close to where the ship was, but there was no proof. So then I found another ship, which was supposedly the second victim of the SMS Wolf, again through fishermen. And again, there was no proof. So I would think those 2 are my favorite shipwrecks, because I've spent hours on them looking for evidence, measuring the ship, the wreck. And then I managed to find both bells of both wrecks after. But it took me 5 years. I found the bell of the Worcestershire in 2014.
Yes.
And then I just last week found the bell of the Perseus.
And that's the one I saw just recently on Facebook, right?
Yeah.
Listening to that story, I'm amazed by some of the parallels with some of the other great wreck divers around the world. So John Chatterton and Richie Kohler's shadow diver expeditions that they made out to U869. I mean, it took them 5 years to identify that ship as well, and it became a massive passion for them. And so it sounds like it was the same for you with the Worcestershire and the Perseus. So amazing. And tell me a little more about the explorations and the things that you specifically did to try and identify the wrecks.
Yeah, so I think the first one was to compare locations of where the wrecks were compared to the last known locations of the Worcestershire. But there was no specific location. The location that was given was about 3 to 4 kilometers away. So it's not really evidence, right? You can't just... One thing I've learned is that Admiralty maps and historical records are sometimes really bad, really wrong. It's very rarely that if they say there's a shipwreck in a certain location, there is. And I would say that's like 1% of all the Admiralty information. So based on the locations is how I narrowed down potential candidates of what this shipwreck could be. And then the next thing I did was I measured the beam of the wreck and compared it to the beam of the Worcestershire, and it was a very close match, maybe a foot or 2 off. Then started matching features. For example, how many masts are there, how many screws or propellers. You can kind of build a case by collecting circumstantial evidence. Is it a steamship? Is it a diesel ship? How many engines are there? So then what I try to do is to identify maybe crockery or plates or anything like that, because they generally have the company name of a ship. So look for evidence like that, or the maker's plate, so there's so many things that you can do. Finding the bell is the ultimate, I would say.
Of course, because it always has the name of the ship on the bell,
name,
right?
Ideally, but however, it could also be a challenge, because some ships, they change name. However, they keep the original name of the first ship in the bell, so they don't change the bell.
So in your exploration, we mentioned side mount earlier, and you were using side mounts in wreck exploration. Tell us a little bit about how you dive side mounts, in particular for wreck diving.
Yeah, so I dive multiple configurations. My basic, I would say the mainstream dive configuration is side mount with 2 tanks, which I use for dives up to maybe 40 meters and also for cave diving. So I think one of the limitations is actually more the gear I have. I have a very light, travel-friendly BC for side mount, which doesn't have much lift capacity. So that's why I just use 2 tanks or 3 tanks at most. What I call lightweight dives, maybe up to 50 meters, 40 meters, do some exploration. And then for anything deep, I use obviously the old twin tanks on the back, the hog, and maybe 3 or 4 tanks. So then I use rebreather for cave exploration. So I have 3 kind of setups, and I like side mount a lot. I used to actually dive side mount even before I did the training. I just took my tech harness and slung a tank on the side, and I called it side mount, but it's not. It's more stage mount.
Yeah.
So side mount is completely different. It's more disciplined. You need to get your trim right. So those were challenges that I went through and slowly started improving. But I must say I really like side mount because as a diver, if I do a lightweight recreational dive, I am independent. I am self-sufficient because I have I have 2 tanks, and I am so much freedom, and you can go through tight spaces. So I really love it.
Yeah. And I do a lot of the same thing. I find myself often solo diving, and obviously it's a little bit controversial doing that. But once you have the, number 1, the dives under your belt, I guess, and number 2, the experience and the training, and side mount does give you that truly 2 independent gas supplies, such that if one does fail, you have at least 50% of your gas supply, and generally you'll have more depending on what the failure is as well. And I think so long as you don't become complacent with that and practice, it's not a matter of if something goes wrong. When something goes wrong, you're going to be able to deal with it. And obviously it depends on the dives you're doing too. If the dives are relatively benign, then fine. But as they get deeper and more complicated, it pays to have a buddy with you or be part of a team. So I get it completely because I do a lot of that myself. So as part of exploring the wrecks in Sri Lanka, you wrote the book, Ghosts of the Deep, Diving the Shipwrecks of Sri Lanka. And as I said earlier, I had the pleasure of having a copy of that. As I said, I wish I had another copy. I'll have to get one. But I looked through that and really enjoyed the work that you'd done there. And I know from personal experience writing my own book how much effort and work it takes to actually write a book. So talk us through your experience in developing and writing that book.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it was a significant effort to do that. And also, I think I always tell people, if you write one book, do another one, because everything you learn about writing books on the first, you can do a much better job in your second book, because you learn so much about writing a book. It's not as easy as one would think. And then I found actually the hardest part was to finish it. Starting it and obviously finishing it. Hard to get the ball rolling, and also hard to nail all the details and make sure everything is perfect. Coming back to your question, the reason I wanted to write a book was when I had explored so many shipwrecks. And I also found that there were stories behind these wrecks. They were not just, like hunks of metal lying in the ocean on their own. They had a lot of history, historical value. And also they had human value, because there were stories about people who actually lived and sailed on those ships. So there were so many angles to a shipwreck that I thought, there's amazing stories about how these ships sank, what went on some time ago in the history during wars, and also about these people. So I thought, I need to do something. And I just started writing, and it took me about 4 years, really. It is about 3 to 4 years. I'm going to do it. And then I just started writing.
It is an amazing experience, because I had a similar thing. Mine was written much faster. And what shocked me about it was I got started reasonably easily. I mapped out my table of contents, and then I was away. When I wrote about Canterbury, I was writing about a ship that I actually hadn't stood on out of the water since 1992. And I wrote the book in 2015-16. And I wrote everything from memory, almost everything. And it was just staggering what poured out. And I agree with you. The beginning part was a little bit hard. The middle part was really easy. just the writing and finding imagery and everything. But boy, finishing it is so tough because, we all want them to be perfect, and you find yourself just editing, finding spelling mistakes. Did you have someone edit for you, or did you do that all yourself?
Yeah, so that was a bit of a challenge for me because I actually had some friends. I gave chapters away to, some friends who are good in doing this.
Yes.
And also my girlfriend did one whole section of it very well. And I think that's the best section, which didn't have any grammar or spelling mistakes. Then I used some online services to do the rest because she didn't have time. I did the same thing you did. My eyes got so tired because I was going through it every day, going through it. And I would say it's counterproductive because you stop seeing your own mistakes. You just gloss through it.
Our minds just are mapped in such a way that we just gloss over things, don't we? And you don't actually read it properly. You mentioned write a second book. Have you written a second book after Ghosts of the Deep?
Not yet, but I'm working on the second edition.
Okay.
Ghost of the Deep with some amendments and cleaning it up. So another challenge I had was underwater pictures, even though it comes up well in your screen. It doesn't look good on when you print it.
Absolutely.
So that I had some horrifying experiences when I looked up the book and, oh no, this is not what I wanted. But so I'm going to fix all those and make a second edition. Then I'm also considering writing a book about, I would say, Sri Lanka's first extensive underwater cave system.
Right.
Which I found in the mountains. So I want to do like a photo book on that expeditions and what we found, etc.
Well, that's a great segue into that because that was really my next question was about your discovery in the Sri Lankan mountains. And I saw just some of the pictures and very brief descriptions of what it was taking to get into this cave. So talk me through the discovery that you made.
Yeah, so what really happened was when I finished my cave course, and I'm actually, I would say, a reasonably inexperienced cave diver. I finished my course in 2016, late 2016. So it's been like 3 years since I've been cave diving. I dived some great caves in Thailand, Songhong, Sakao in the south, off Krabi, etc. Then I was like, this is a great diving experience. Why can't I do it in Sri Lanka? So I was looking around, talking to people, talking to geologists, trying to find possible places for exploration. When I heard of this place called a Blue Water Pond, it was in the kind of the mountainous regions of Sri Lanka. And I was immediately interested. Maybe, it could be something that I could go in. So I met the guide who actually does expeditions where he takes people hiking down a trail into this Blue Water Pond. So it's an underground pond. And basically you have to first hike about half an hour in the forest. And you come to this like a rabbit hole.
Yes.
Essentially I call it the rabbit hole. It's like Alice in Wonderland's rabbit hole. You got to rappel about 10 meters down. It's rock, it's wet, you've got bats, the caves, right? And then it's tight squeezing spaces. So it takes about 1 hour actually from that hole on the top of the mountain, which is about 800 meters above sea level, to get to this underground pond, which is 8 meters below at the starting point. It's logistically very hard to get down to the Blue Water Pond. But the Blue Water Pond is an amazing place. It's maybe about 30 meters across. And depending on the water levels, it varies from, sometimes the whole cave is flooded. So you don't really see that cavernous cave top.
Right.
But at its best, from a visually pleasing standpoint, you see this beautiful blue water lake, which is very clear. So when I went to it, when I first saw it, I thought it was really shallow. I wasted my time. I don't think I can dive. And I didn't take my gear on my first trip. So I just swam to the end. And the water is relatively cold for a Sri Lankan. It was 23 degrees.
Right. That's just fine.
Yeah, exactly. So then what I did was I free dived with my mask and dive torch, and I just explored. And I saw that this was going in. So I was very excited. And the next week itself, I came back with all my gear and then got the support of the guide and a couple of villagers to help me because taking stuff down was a nightmare. You need to have one person to carry one piece of gear. Because it's really hard to get down. And the other challenge is that in Sri Lanka, I'm really the first cave diver. There was no one else to come with me.
Right.
So I decided to do it on my own. I know it's controversial and it might sound risky, but I was confident I could do it. So I started going in, and then I found that this was quite a big underwater cave.
Yeah.
So that's how it happened. And I started going in, exploring and mapping it as much as possible.
Sounds amazing. And back to that, doing it by yourself, I think a lot depends on what you encounter when you enter the cave, right? I mean, if you immediately came to a whole bunch of squeezes and rock falls and these sort of things, then that might cause you to take pause and step back a little bit versus if you're finding very clear tunnels where you can lay line and be confident in your navigation and so on. So I understand that. Well, it sounds amazing. I really look forward to seeing some more information about that, and perhaps when your book comes out as well. It is just brilliant. And there may well be some people who are listening who might want to contact you and join you in there, including myself. So let's see what we can do, huh?
Yeah.
Brilliant. I saw also you're speaking at the Asia Dive Expo, or ADEX, in Singapore in April, and the talk itself, I think we're going back to wreck diving perhaps, but maybe not. The talk's titled The Art and Science of Unraveling Deep Mysteries. So that's a super interesting title, a bit mysterious in itself. I love the concept of the art and science because I think there is a little bit of both in exploration. Can you share a little more about what people can expect to hear in your presentation?
Yeah, so I think the audience for this presentation is really any diver who likes shipwrecks. It's meant for that type of diver.
Sure.
And my message is that if you're diving a wreck, it's so much a better experience if you really know what the wreck is, and also you know the background. It's not a presentation for like serious explorers who are doing this as their professional life, right? It's more for anyone who dives a wreck to be more informed. And also, I think the second message is that always question what people tell you about shipwrecks, because people might tell you that this shipwreck is named so and so, but it could be a completely different ship. So you could actually help as a diver if you're a bit more observant and if you're a bit more skeptical, you could actually help and aid in discovering the identity of a shipwreck. So it's essentially techniques that I actually used in my exploration on how you could look for shipwrecks, how you can try to figure out what they are. And I think I already talked about some of the things that I did, measuring, looking at boilers, anchors, try to figure out how old the ship could be. It's mostly broad techniques that people can be aware of so that when they dive a shipwreck, they make mental notes or they take notes. Okay, I saw an anchor here. Ship seems to be maybe 100 meters long, and it has 4 masts. It had 2 boilers. It had one single screw propeller. And that could help aiding identification and also really figuring out what the shipwreck. So it's just techniques and tips for divers to have a bit more wreck mindset, really.
I understand, yeah. And I like the concept of you can actually be part of the exploration or the gathering of knowledge about a particular wreck. And that's an interesting perspective, because I hadn't thought about it that way before, because I agree with you completely. I think whenever you dive a wreck, or a mine for that matter, you really should understand the history of it and understand what you're diving and try and understand as much as you possibly can. And some of that for me comes back to safety as well. Number one, making it interesting. And then number two, safety. The more you know about it, the more you know how it's laid out and how the wreck is going to go, the better it is for you in terms of your awareness in the water and understanding where you might be on the wreck. But I get it from the exploration and the uncovering mysteries type perspective as well. So,
yeah.
Okay, so diving in Sri Lanka, just from what you've told me, sounds amazing. So tell us a bit more. If I was traveling to Sri Lanka and wanted to dive and see some shipwrecks, caves, whatever, what could I expect there, and what's the best way to travel there?
It depends on what level of diver you are. So if you're a technical diver, unfortunately, our industry is not developed to a point where we have many technical dive centers and options. However, we do have a technical diving center which has support for rebreathers, etc. in the East Coast, where the HMS Hermes is.
Right.
And the HMS Hermes, that's the world's first purpose-built aircraft carrier, which was sunk by the Japanese in 1942. It's recognized by even the British Sports Diver magazine as one of the top 100 shipwrecks to dive in the world. So it's very popular already. And lots of tech divers just come to Sri Lanka to spend 2 weeks just to dive that. And they go back without doing anything else. So Sri Lanka essentially has 2 seasons, the West Coast season and the East Coast, depending on the monsoons. And theoretically, you could dive any time of the year in either coast. However, traveling in Sri Lanka can be a little bit hard because we still haven't got a well-developed highway system linking all the major cities on the 2 shores. So a 200-kilometer journey might take 6 to 8 hours, depending on the traffic. But that makes the country more rural and unexplored. So you also know that Sri Lanka came out of a long civil war.
Yes.
10 years ago, right? So things are changing, but we still have areas that are completely fresh, unexplored, undeveloped, and that's really great because you can actually experience nature as it is before human intervention and development starts taking place and changing it. So overall, I think anyone traveling to Sri Lanka for diving can, depending on which part of the coast they want to dive. Colombo on the west coast is great for shipwrecks from 10 meters to 60 meters, 65 meters. I think the deepest wreck I've found so far is 65 meters. Nothing beyond that, unfortunately, or fortunately. And if you really like shipwrecks, then I think I would suggest come to Colombo, and there's a dive center in Colombo. Unfortunately, there's no tech diving in Colombo yet. So any tech expedition has to be kind of self-organized and self-arranged, etc.
But you can get helium, for instance.
Yeah, so helium is a challenge that I'm trying to overcome. I haven't done any helium dives in Sri Lanka yet because I didn't really need it so far, but it should be a possibility to overcome. In the East Coast, you can get it in the diving center that they are doing professionally in the East Coast. But basically, Sri Lanka is, I think, really great for shipwrecks. For reefs, there are some good reefs, but it's not like the reefs you would find in maybe Malaysia, Philippines, and Maldives, where there are walls and lots of soft coral and stuff like that. It's more rocky reefs with some soft coral, shoaling fish. So it's a different kind of experience. But I think what really makes Sri Lanka stand out are the shipwrecks and the history behind the shipwrecks and the number of shipwrecks that's scattered all around the island.
Sounds brilliant. So we'll have to add that to the list. Well, DJ, I don't have a lot more, so I've really enjoyed talking to you, and I've really enjoyed sort of hearing more about the shipwrecks of Sri Lanka in particular and your cave exploration. I congratulate you on what you've achieved. It seems as if you're a beacon of tech diving in Sri Lanka, and I'm super impressed with what you've been able to achieve as pretty much one man there. Amazing. Thank you so much, and I really enjoyed talking to you and also meeting you for the first time. Appreciate it. As I said, every time I do an interview, I've got another place in the world to go, but known of this for quite some time, so it's definitely on the list. And anyone who's potentially going to ADEX in Singapore, it's running from April 11 to 14, and DJ's talking there. I know my good friend Pete Mesley's talking there and a few other great divers, so I'm sure it will be a really, really good show, and I hope it goes well for you too, DJ. Thanks so much. Thank you very much, mate. You've been listening to Speaking Sidemount from www.sidemountpros.com. If you like the podcast, please subscribe and consider leaving us a 5-star review. If there's something you'd like us to cover on the show, then let us know via our Facebook page listed in the podcast notes. Thanks again, and we look forward to you joining us on our next episode of Speaking Sidemount.